He almost didn't look down. That was the thing he would come back to, later, in the quiet of his study with the lights off and the city doing its ordinary business 14 floors below. He had boarded the 74 at Aldgate because his car was in for service, and it was raining, and he had told himself it was only 4 stops. He had stood in the aisle with his briefcase between his feet and his phone in his hand, and he had not looked up once in the first 3 stops. Because there was nothing in the aisle of the 74 at 7:45 on a Wednesday evening that he had any reason to look at. Then the bus lurched on a pothole, and he grabbed the overhead rail and looked down to find his footing, and there she was, Dorothy Adler, his housekeeper, asleep in the window seat 2 rows ahead. She was asleep in the particular way of someone who does not mean to be, head tilted to the glass, coat still buttoned, one hand loose in her lap, the other resting on the seat beside her near a bag that had fallen open at the clasp. Her face in sleep had none of the careful economy of her waking face. It was simply a face, a tired one. The tiredness of it was the kind that goes all the way down, the kind that 2 nights' sleep does not touch. He would have looked away. He would have found a reason not to see her. The way employers find reasons not to see the people who clean their houses on the bus going home after the cleaning is done. But the bag was open, and from it, thin, slightly tinny, the specific audio quality of a phone left playing at low volume on the floor of a bag. A voice. A boy's voice. Not speaking to him. Not speaking to anyone in particular. Leaving a message, the way children leave messages for their mothers, without calculation or performance, saying the thing directly because there is no reason not to. Mum, it's me. My hands are better today. Both of them. I drew for an hour this morning. I just wanted you to know. Edward Whitmore stood in the aisle of the 74 with his briefcase between his feet and his hand on the overhead rail, and he did not move for a long time. The bus went through 2 more stops. He did not pull the cord. He looked at the bag. The open clasp, the corner of a plastic folder, worn at the edges, thick with paper. The kind of thickness that speaks not of accumulation, but of carrying. Of something that has been taken out and put back and taken out again so many times that the folder itself has grown soft. He could see, at the exposed edge of the folder's front cover, a piece of paper folded small. A letter, handwritten, the child's handwriting immediately identifiable as a child's from the careful, uneven pressure of the letters. He could not read it from where he stood. He did not read it. He looked away. He looked out the window. The city passed. He was 2 stops past where he needed to be. He pressed the cord and got off at a stop he did not know the name of. He stood on the pavement in the rain, and the bus moved away, and Dorothy Adler was still on it, still asleep, with her bag still open, and her son's voice still circling somewhere inside it. Edward Whitmore stood on that pavement, with his hand pressed flat against the brick wall beside the bus shelter, and stared at the pavement. He stood there for 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes, because when he finally took his phone out to call a car, the screen showed him the time, and he did the subtraction. He did not have a name yet for what he was feeling. It would be 3 days before he had a name for it. What he had in that moment, standing in the rain on a street he had never been on, was the sensation of a man who has been living inside a perfectly maintained system and has just caught a glimpse, through a gap in the machinery, of everything the system was designed not to see. Dorothy Adler had worked in his house for 14 months. He had hired her through the agency his household manager Philip recommended, and she had been, by every available measure, exactly what she was supposed to be. Thorough, quiet, reliable. She arrived on time and left on time, and the rooms she cleaned were clean. and the household ran in the way that households run when the people inside them are doing their jobs without needing to be managed. He had spoken to her perhaps a dozen times in 14 months. He could not have told you, before that evening on the bus, what her son's name was. The house itself was the kind of house that requires a staff to maintain without appearing to require a staff. 12 rooms in a detached property on a private road in the part of the city where the pavements are wider and the trees are older, and the houses set themselves back from the street at a distance that communicates something without saying it. Edward had lived there since the divorce 6 years ago, alone except for weekends when his children came, Harriet, 19, and Ben, 16. And the house reorganized itself around their presence and then reorganized itself back. Philip Graves managed the household. Dorothy cleaned it. A gardener came on Tuesdays. Edward moved through all of it with the practiced efficiency of a man who has converted the entire domestic dimension of his life into a system that does not require him to feel anything about it. This had seemed, for 6 years, like an acceptable arrangement. Philip Graves had been with the Whitmore household for 8 years. He was 49 and had the particular manner of a person who has held a supporting role for so long that the role has become identity. He was not the household manager of a house that Edward Whitmore owned. He was, in his own accounting, the institutional memory of an establishment of which Edward Whitmore happened to be the principal resident. He knew where everything was kept. He knew the service schedules and the maintenance records and the names of the tradespeople who were reliable and the ones who were not. He knew the household with a thoroughness that he had come, quietly, to regard as a form of ownership. He had not wanted Dorothy hired. He had recommended someone else, a woman he had worked with at a previous placement, whose references he had personally vouched for. The agency had presented Dorothy's file alongside it, and Edward had chosen Dorothy on the basis of a single line in her reference. She works as though the house she is cleaning belongs to someone who deserves it. He had not told Philip why he chose her. Philip had never asked, but he had understood, in the way methodical men understand things that threaten their systems, that Dorothy Adler was a variable he had not introduced and could not fully account for. The medication discrepancy had come to him through his wife. She had a habit of reviewing the household inventory when she visited, a habit Philip had never discountenanced, because it occasionally turned up genuine inefficiencies. In late October, she had noted that 2 items in the upstairs medicine cabinet were running low at a rate that did not correspond to household consumption. She had mentioned it to Philip. He had cross-referenced it with the cleaning schedule. The pattern was, on paper, clear. He brought it to Edward on a Friday morning with the manila folder and the spreadsheet and the timeline of dates, presented with the quiet precision of a man who has prepared a case rather than reported a concern. Edward had looked at it for 5 minutes and asked Philip if he was certain. Philip had said he was certain of the correlation. Edward had looked at the spreadsheet for another moment and said he would handle it. That had been 3 days before the bus. The confrontation was scheduled for Monday morning. Edward would be there. Philip had arranged it. Dorothy called in. The 2 kitchen staff as witnesses. The formal structure of a disciplinary meeting imposed on what everyone in the room would understand was a foregone conclusion. Philip had, in his own mind, already written the ending of the story. He was experienced enough at these things to know how they went. What Philip did not know was what Edward had seen on the 74 on Wednesday evening. Edward had not slept well in the 3 intervening days. He had sat in his study with the lights on, and then with the lights off, and he had looked at the spreadsheet, and then he had looked at the window, and he had thought about a plastic folder worn soft at the edges, and a boy's voice saying, "My hands are better today." Both of them. He had thought about the letter in the child's handwriting, the corner he had seen and not read. He had thought about a woman asleep against a bus window at 7:45 in the evening in a coat still buttoned, with the specific total tiredness of a person who has been spending everything they have for a very long time. He had not told Philip what he'd seen. He had said nothing to anyone. He had done something else instead, on Saturday morning, which he also told no one. He had gone to Prentice Street. He had found the address through the agency, a single phone call, which the agency gave without question, because he was the employer of record, and the question of what an employer is entitled to know about an employee was, in the agency's framework, a simple one. Edward had written down the address and sat looking at it for a moment before folding the paper into his jacket pocket. He had told himself he was going to verify something. He had understood, even as he told himself this, that verification was not the right word for what he was doing. He drove himself. He did not take the car he used for work, the one with the Whitmore Group plates that everybody in his professional world recognized. He took his own car, the older one he kept in the second bay, the one that didn't announce him. He drove the route without using the navigation, which meant he took a wrong turn twice and arrived at Prentice Street from the north end rather than the south, which meant he passed the full length of it before he found number 31. The street was the kind of street that a man like Edward Whitmore had driven past 10,000 times in a city like this one without ever having a reason to stop. It was not dramatically poor. It was not picturesque about its limitations. It was simply the street that exists at the precise point where the city stops performing for anyone and simply gets on with being itself. The terraced houses with their front paths at careful right angles. The recycling bins lined up with the particular conscientiousness of people who have been given very little and are determined to do it correctly. The single tree at the north end that someone had planted and someone else had put a small cage around to protect and which had grown, against reasonable expectation, into something real. He parked and sat in the car. He was in the car for 8 minutes before he got out. He got out because sitting in the car was a version of the same system he had been running for 6 years, looking at things from inside a sealed vehicle, and something about that had become, over the past 3 days and 2 sleepless nights, impossible to continue. He stood on the pavement. The building was a Victorian terrace conversion, the kind that had been handsome in a period photograph and had been maintained since then at the level of function over form. The pointing was good. The gutters were clear. The front door had been repainted not recently, but not neglectedly. He counted up to the second floor. 2 windows. One had a plant on the sill, something green and persistent, the kind of houseplant that survives on determination. The other window had something taped to the inside of the glass, facing outward. A piece of paper, large enough that from the pavement, at an angle, you could see it was a drawing. He needed to be directly below it to see it properly. He crossed the pavement and stood beneath the window and looked up. A bridge, drawn in pencil with the particular density of someone who has gone over every line multiple times, not from uncertainty, but from love of the thing itself, the specific care of a person for whom each line is its own satisfaction. The bridge was structurally impossible in 2 places and entirely plausible in spirit, the kind of design that says, I know the rules, and I am drawing past them, because that is the point. The towers were detailed down to the cable anchorages. The deck had a pedestrian walkway marked in a different weight of line in the lower right corner. In the handwriting he recognized from the folded letter, the name and the age. Thomas, age 12. Edward stood on the pavement of Prentice Street in the gray of a Saturday morning and looked at that drawing in the window for a long time, long enough that a woman coming out of the door of number 29 glanced at him with the brief territorial assessment of a person checking whether a stranger on her street is a problem. He was not a problem. He was simply a man standing on a pavement with his hands in his coat pockets, looking up at a bridge drawn by a 12-year-old boy who drew on his good days enough for both. He walked back to the car slowly. He sat in it. He pressed both hands flat on the steering wheel and looked at them. His hands, his ordinary 56-year-old hands, which had never once in his life been unable to hold a pencil if he wanted to hold one, had never woken him at 3 a.m, had never made the simplest things expensive. He sat there and let that fact occupy its actual dimensions, which were larger than he had previously allowed. When he finally started the engine, he drove to the end of the street, turned right, drove half a block, and stopped again. He sat at the curb for 2 more minutes. Then he drove home. On Monday morning, he arrived at the house at 9. Philip had assembled the meeting in the kitchen, Dorothy standing near the window, Philip at the table with his folder, the 2 kitchen staff positioned near the wall in the manner of people who have been told to be present and are already composing their accounts of having been elsewhere. The room had the temperature of a space in which something unpleasant has been made procedurally inevitable. Philip began. He was good at this, practiced, precise, the appearance of reluctant duty without any of its actual discomfort. He laid out the discrepancy. He named the medication, the specific formulation, the specific dates, the specific shortfall per week. He explained the correlation with Dorothy's shifts with the careful language of a man who knows the word correlation is doing a great deal of work and is hoping no one examines it. He said that he had, with Mr. Whitmore's knowledge, consulted the household's legal position, and that the thresholds for formal action were met. He said all of this in the tone of a man performing a service, as though the decision had been made before him and above him, and he was merely its vehicle. He did not look at Dorothy once while he spoke. He looked at his folder and at Edward and at the wall behind Dorothy's left shoulder. Dorothy stood near the window throughout. Her coat was hung by the door. She had been working since 7. The coat was a different thing on working days, and she stood with her hands at her sides and her back completely straight and her eyes on Philip's face throughout. She did not shift her weight. She did not look at the floor. She listened to everything he said with the full, unbroken attention of a person who intends to be present for every word of something that is being done to her, because presence is the only form of resistance available, and she has decided it is enough. When Philip finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she turned, and she looked at Edward, who was standing near the doorway, and something passed across her face. Not the recognition of a woman caught, but the recognition of a woman who has been waiting for a moment and is deciding, now that it has arrived, exactly how to meet it. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was the same temperature as always, entirely level, not raised, not reduced. "I have never taken anything from this house that wasn't given to me." A pause. One beat. "But I need you to know something." Philip made a slight motion, a restrained intake that was the precursor to an interruption. Edward did not look at him. Dorothy looked at Edward only. "I have been carrying my son's medical file in my bag every day for 8 months. Every appointment letter, every specialist referral, his pain diary, his school exemption forms, his prescription records." She stopped once, then continued. "I carry them because I cannot afford to miss a single appointment or lose a single letter, and I have learned that if the paperwork is not with me, it gets lost, and losing it costs him. I don't say that for sympathy." Her voice was entirely steady. "I say it so that when you look for what I've stolen, you'll know exactly where to look. And you'll find nothing." The kitchen was very still. Philip said, "That doesn't explain the..." "Philip," Edward's voice was quiet. One word, and Philip stopped. Edward looked at Dorothy. How old is your son? A pause. 12. What's his name? Dorothy looked at him, the same reading look, the same careful full attention. Thomas. Something moved in Edward's face, not dramatically, the smallest possible version of a large thing. The kind of shift that people who have been trained by years of professional composure allow themselves in a room that is watching. He looked at Philip. I'd like you to take the staff and give us the kitchen, please. Philip did not move for 2 full seconds. This was, in the language of Philip Graves, a thunderstorm. He had arranged this meeting. He had built the structure of it, prepared the outcome of it, positioned himself in it as the person whose institutional judgment was finally being vindicated. He had not prepared for the meeting to be taken from him 1 sentence in. He left. The staff left. The kitchen door closed. Edward pulled out the chair nearest him and sat down, not at the head of the table, not in the position of authority, just in the nearest chair, the ordinary act of a person who needs to be sitting for what he is about to say. He gestured to the chair across from him. Dorothy sat. There's a drawing, he said, in your window at Prentice Street. A bridge. Dorothy looked at him. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a person recalibrating the entire architecture of a conversation they thought they understood. I drove past on Saturday, he said. I want to be direct about that. I'm not going to pretend it was something it wasn't. He looked at the table for a moment. I was on the 74 on Wednesday evening. You were asleep. I heard. He stopped. Then I heard his message. The one he left about his hands. Dorothy did not move. My hands are better today, Edward said very quietly. Both of them. Something happened in Dorothy's face then, not a breaking, nothing public or dramatic, simply the particular interior movement of a person hearing something they have kept private for a long time, said aloud by someone who had no right to know it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the table. He draws on his good days, she said. He can't always. When his hands are bad, he can't hold the pencil. So on the good days, he draws enough for both. Edward was quiet. He wants to be an engineer, Dorothy said. He thinks he's going to design bridges. She paused. I've never told him it might be harder for him than for other people. I've only told him it will take longer. Longer isn't the same as never. She said this last sentence the way you say something you have said so many times it has become structural. The kind of sentence that holds a life up from the inside. Edward looked at his hands on the table. He was 56 years old and had built a property development company from a single site office and 2 employees into an enterprise that currently had 47 active projects across 4 countries. And in the course of doing that, he had sat across from a great many people in a great many rooms, and he had understood most of them. He understood Dorothy Adler now, in this kitchen, on this Monday morning, in the particular and specific way that he understood she had been in this house for 14 months, and he had never once asked her son's name. He had built a system. The system had been very good at many things. It had not been good at this. What came next took the shape of an ordinary morning rather than a dramatic scene, because real things, the real repairing kind, usually do. He asked Dorothy to take the day. He spent the rest of it with Philip, which was a different kind of conversation. Longer, more careful, and ending not with Philip's termination, which would have been too clean, but with a restructuring of the household arrangement that removed Philip's capacity to use process as an instrument, and reinstated Edward as the person who was actually responsible for the people in his house. Philip understood what this meant. He did not contest it. He had 8 years of institutional knowledge that remained genuinely useful, and he was smart enough to understand that the version of himself that had been running that meeting was no longer available as an option. The medication. It emerged that same afternoon, when Edward requested the pharmacy records that Philip had not thought to obtain, believing the correlation was sufficient, had been adjusted in the household prescription by the family doctor 3 weeks before the shortfall began. The cabinet had simply not been restocked at the new dosage level. There was no discrepancy. There had only ever been an assumption. Edward called Dorothy that evening. He told her what the pharmacy records showed. He told her he would have written documentation for her file by tomorrow morning. She said thank you. He said there was one more thing. He said, I'd like to do something. For Thomas. Not as compensation, that word doesn't fit. As a recognition of something I should have recognized a long time ago. She was quiet on the other end of the line. The Whitmore Foundation has a bursary program for young engineers, he said. I'd like to create a strand within it specifically for young people with chronic health conditions who are pursuing science or engineering. Named for Thomas. A pause. The Thomas Adler Young Engineers Bursary. I've spoken to the Foundation's director this afternoon. She says it's entirely feasible if we move quickly. Another pause. Shorter. I know this is a lot to receive from someone who spent 14 months not asking your son's name. I'm not asking you to feel good about that. I'm asking you to let it mean something going forward. The silence on Dorothy's end of the phone was a different kind of silence from any of the silences that day. It was the silence of a woman sitting in a 2-room flat on Prentice Street, in the quiet of an evening, with her son's drawings on the wall around her and his notebooks under his bed, hearing something she had not permitted herself to hope for, because hope, when you cannot afford its failure, is an expense like any other. I'll ask Thomas, she said. It should be his decision. Thomas said yes. He said it in the specific way of a 12-year-old who does not yet know how to perform emotions for the benefit of other people and therefore simply has them, directly, in the room where they occur. He looked at his mother for a long time after she told him, a long, still 12-year-old look, the kind that is doing more interior work than its surface suggests. Then he looked at his hands. Then he said, "Tell him thank you. Tell him." He stopped, started again. "Tell him the bridge in the window took me 3 weeks. I had to do it in parts, on the good days." Edward was told. He received this information in his car, parked outside his office building on a Tuesday evening, on the phone with Dorothy, with the engine off and the city moving past his windows, in the ordinary way of a city that does not know or care what is being said inside the cars parked along its streets. He sat with what Thomas had said for a moment, the full weight of it, the 3 weeks, the parts, the good days. He said, "Tell him it was worth the wait." The announcement was made at the Whitmore Foundation's annual meeting in February, in a room with high windows and a long table, and the particular formality of a space that takes its purpose seriously. Edward stood at the microphone with notes he did not consult. He spoke for 4 minutes about what the bursary was, and why it existed, and who it was named for. He said Thomas's name into a microphone in front of 60 people, and at the table to his left, in a blazer that was slightly too large in the shoulders and a posture that needed nothing from anyone in that room. A 12-year-old boy listened to his own name spoken in public for the first time, in a context that was not a medical appointment or a school register. And he sat very still, and his hands, his better hands, the ones that had drawn the bridge, were folded on the table in front of him. Dorothy sat beside him. She was wearing the good coat, not the buttoned-up working coat, a different one, the one she wore when something mattered enough to mark it. She looked at the window on the far side of the room while Edward spoke, not from inattention, but from the particular need of a person who is feeling something large and precise and does not want to spend it all at once. At the end of Edward's remarks, there was a silence before the applause, the natural pause of a room deciding what it has just heard. In that silence, the papers on the table near the open window lifted, all of them at once, in a single, slow breath, and settled back. Thomas looked at them. Then, he looked at his mother. She felt him looking and turned, and they looked at each other for a moment in the way of two people who share a private language that was built during difficult years and that no one else in the room could decode. Thomas smiled. Small, certain, his. If you have ever carried something in a bag that no one around you knew was there, the weight of someone else's pain, the paperwork of a life that keeps requiring proof of itself, a photograph of someone before things got hard, a letter in a child's handwriting beginning, "This is the list of things that don't hurt," then you already know what Dorothy Adler carried on the 74 every evening of those 14 months. You know what it costs, and you know why she paid it without accounting for the cost, and you know that the word for that is not heroism. Because heroism is a performance, and this was simply love, organized into what was required. And if you are the person who almost didn't look down, who stood in the aisle of their life with their phone in their hand and their briefcase between their feet and their eyes, arranged away from everything that was not the system, then this is the night to let the bus go 2 stops past where you intended, and get off in the rain on a street you don't know the name of, and stand there for 4 minutes, and begin. Because there is a kind of strength that makes no noise and asks for no witness, and carries everything it must carry in a bag on a bus through the city at the end of a long day. And the only extraordinary thing about it, the only thing that separates it from a miracle, is that someone, once, happened to look.